It's finally October, the month of spooks. I mean, who isn't excited for Halloween? Just look at my town of Neighborville. Everyone has decorated every corner of the town for the spooky season. I still have to go to school though, which really pisses me off. But what is there to hesitate about anyway? If we have to go to school, then we have to go to school, even in the spooky month. So as a usual school student, I packed my school bags and walked to school, which was not very far from where I'm staying. Even though it's the spooky month, there isn't anything spooky about October except for candies. It's not like anything can scare me in Halloween anyway. In school today, we got a new student in our class. His name was Paul. He had orange hair with a black jacket with the logo of a jack-o'-lantern stitched to the chest. When our teacher asked him to introduce himself, he just said a few words and scooted to the empty seat desk next to my seat. I felt a bit sad for him since it was his first day and he was a bit confused and scared too. He didn't talk much, probably because he was shy, so I asked him if he wants to be friends with me. He said yes, and we hung out for the rest of the day. At 3 o'clock, when class was dismissed, I saw 10th graders beating and bullying Paul at the back road, so I grabbed the stick and chased them away. I helped Paul up and he thanked me, and then he ran away as fast as he could. I thought he was probably scared that he would be bullied again, so I walked back home thinking not much about what happened. The next morning when I came to school, we were all called to the school hall for an important assembly. As we were walking to the hall, I saw some parents talking to some teachers. They were panicking and some were even weeping, so I knew something wasn't right at all. Assembly then started and our principal announced that 3 10th grade students went missing last night, and to my surprise, the images of the 3 students were those 10th graders that were beating up Paul yesterday. For some reason, I had a bad feeling about this. Paul wasn't scared, worried, or shocked at all when he heard that. He just whispered to me in a shady tone, "Yeah, they're probably just absent and staying home to skip school. Not like they got eaten by a monster or something." At 5 p.m. the same day, Paul texted me if he wanted me to come over to his place for a group study, so I did. When I reached his house, I saw a pumpkin patch on his lawn. It took up about a quarter of his lawn, and for some reason, I had this uneasy and eerie feeling when I walked up close to it, almost as if the pumpkin patch had a soul of its own, and it could detect your presence. I shook the feeling away and continued walking to his front door. I then noticed 3 jack-o'-lanterns lined up sideways, facing front on his porch. I looked at the faces of the jack-o'-lanterns and noticed it was the faces of the 3 10th graders who beat up Paul that were carved onto the pumpkins. I guess maybe this is how Paul released his anger, by carving the faces of people he hates onto pumpkins. Well, the truth about that took a much more darker turn. The next evening, when I was walking back home from school, in the distance, I saw a greedy hobo steal one of the pumpkins from Paul's patch in his lawn. I ran and tried to stop him when I saw something that made me freeze in my tracks. The big pumpkin opened up a wide mouth with razor-sharp teeth. The vines lashed towards the old man, picking him up by the legs, while the others were strangling him. The pumpkin pulled the hobo into its large mouth and ate him head first, then slowly swallowing and crunching till the man's legs were only exposed. Traumatized with fear, I rubbed my eyes quickly, thinking that they were playing tricks on me, and as my vision cleared, the pumpkin patch was still there, perfectly normal, but with no sign of the hobo or the pumpkin he stole. It was as if he disappeared into thin air, just like that. Or perhaps he could have been eaten by that pumpkin. Maybe I wasn't hallucinating at all. I ran and snuck up to Paul's lawn and crouched towards the pumpkin patch. Luckily it was at about 6:45 in the evening, so I could blend in with the slight darkness. I slowly lifted one of the big leaves and saw the skulls of rodents and even the skull of a goat. Probably a zombie goat. If so, that would be okay. There was a putrid stench coming from one of the big pumpkins, almost as if like the smell of rotting corpses. Holding my nose tightly, I used a pocket carving knife I had and cut open the top of the pumpkin. I expected to see the normal inside of a pumpkin containing seeds and pulp, but what I saw was even worse than I had imagined. There were bones, guts, blood, and a perfectly clean cut head, or what was left of the head, now just a bloody skull with some skin and an eyeball in the socket. I had seen enough that evening, and I ran the hell back to my house quietly. This was the dark secret Paul hid all along. It was Saturday the next morning, but I wasn't planning to stay home and play on my PS4 like I do every weekend. Today, I told my parents I was gonna hit the arcade for maybe a few hours, but really, I was going to Paul's house without him noticing and investigate that pumpkin patch. I took a baseball bat for self-defense, got onto my bicycle, and headed to Paul's house. As I got there, I stayed low so no one would suspect me, thinking I was a pumpkin thief, just like that hobo yesterday. As I snuck into his yard, I noticed there were 3 additional jack-o'-lanterns lined up next to the previous lanterns. The new lanterns, however, had faces of people as well. One of them had the face of the hobo yesterday, and the other 2 were random people, it seems. I slowly backed away from the lanterns and approached the pumpkin patch with caution. With every step I took, I felt my soul being drawn to the patch by its supernatural force. Before I knew it, I couldn't control my body to move itself anymore, almost like I was put in a trance. As my vision blurred while slowly being pulled by the force, the big pumpkin opened a wide, monstrous mouth, ready to devour me. I closed my eyes until I heard a voice behind me. "Lucas, what are you doing in my lawn?" I immediately regained consciousness and turned around to see Paul standing in front of me. "Paul? I can explain," I replied. Paul then grinned and said, "You were looking at my pumpkin patch, huh? Those pumpkins, they're magnificent, aren't they?" I nodded, knowing something was definitely wrong. The pumpkin patch had a soul, and it was a monster itself. Paul knows all about this, but he's just acting innocent to hide it all. Paul then decided to invite me in for a while, but this time his parents were home. I have not met their parents before, and I suspected bad things about them, but I didn't want to be rude, so I walked in instead. I got greeted by his mother as I stepped foot into his house. She took me by the arm and directed me to the kitchen where I met Paul's father. What was weird was Paul's family had orange hair and a jack-o'-lantern logo stitched to their shirts. I talked with Paul's parents for a while when his mother asked me if I wanted some pumpkin pie. I knew about the pumpkins, so I excused myself and I told her I already had breakfast and I was full. When I asked them about the pumpkin patch, Paul's parents told me that pumpkin farming was a thing that was passed on from their ancestors long ago. It was by generations to generation. They suddenly then talked about it being a link to like summonings, demons, and sacrifices, but they stopped right there. After a few minutes, I took the excuse to leave, and so I did. One thing's for sure, I was never going back to Paul's house or anywhere near that pumpkin patch again. Several days passed and our entire town received shocking news. Paul's parents were arrested due to smuggling and dealing drugs alongside reports of multiple homicides. They were brought into the station and both received a prison sentence of 12 years. Paul? He was found dead in his bedroom later that day. Paul committed suicide by hanging himself. Nowadays when I walk to school, I always pass by Paul's house and see that his pumpkin patch is gone. All that's left now of it is just an empty rectangle of dirt. As I look at what's left of the pumpkin patch, I hear the screams of the souls of the people that got eaten by the pumpkins. The jack-o'-lanterns that contained the souls of the victims are gone from his porch. I told my friends, parents, and even the counseling teacher about it, but they think I just have an issue of nightmares and I play too many video games. I kept the truth, and now as I tell them, they do not believe me. Now and then I think about Paul and the pumpkin patch, and the souls of the patch will come and haunt me one of these days. I know it. Fearless.